Hey, this is the Retro XP podcast, a podcast dedicated to retro video games from the first and second gen, with the Odyssey and the Atari 2600 all the way up to Gen 7 with the Xbox 360 and the PS3. On today's episode, I'll be talking about the era of the bro. And honestly, that's the best title I could come up with, really. If for those that don't know, in the late 90s and early 2000s, we started to get these aggressive protagonists showing up in our games with a lot of edge, a lot of attitude, a little bit of personal trauma and suicidal thoughts, but all out action. Games like Max Payne, Dead to Rights, Grand Theft Auto, Devil May Cry, so many others cluttered the retail shelves during this time. Honestly, they were simpler times when video games focused more on the mechanics and action than the stories or motivations, really. These characters didn't have any motivations besides just killing everyone in their way. Anyway, let's talk about some of these games, shall we? Retro XP is part of the Hair of the Dogcast network, so be sure to check out patreon.com/hairofthedogcast to check out every show that the network has and get access to the exclusive community Discord. There's a 30-day free trial available if you want to try it out. Otherwise, you can follow me on X, Threads, and Instagram and YouTube at RetroXPodcast. Whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, be sure to follow and enable notifications so you can find out when I drop a new episode. So I got this idea for this topic when I pulled out a few games to play recently, and most of them being of the action genre. I pulled out games like Dead to Rights, Psy Girls, Rise to Honor, and others, and thought to myself just how simple these games were. Nothing big in the way of, story or plot, just, kind of simple revenge stories for the most part. The more I thought about it, the more I began to realize that this could almost be considered an era in video games with, for the most part, aggressive male protagonists hell-bent on revenge and taking out anyone who stands in their way. Most of these games really revolve around just blasting guns and high-octane explosions and set pieces. Others revolve around aggressive and acrobatic swordplay and other melee weapons. Nowadays, we get, more of these like complex stories with heroes that have these moral codes and such. But man, do I miss the days when it was just run forward and kill. The game's mechanics were at the forefront, and many of these titles had the games built around those mechanics. And we have to kick things off with one of the more iconic heroes of our time, if you call him a hero, Max Payne. His first game came out in 2001 for the PC, PlayStation 2, and Xbox, and it looked like even like the Game Boy Advance had a game. I don't think I've ever seen it or played it, but it's a third-person shooter game developed by Remedy Entertainment, published by Gathering Developers. The game centers on former NYPD detective Max Payne, who attempts to solve the murder of his family and ex-partner while investigating a mysterious new designer drug called Valkyrie. While doing so, Max becomes entangled in this large and complex conspiracy involving a major pharmaceutical company, organized crime, a secret society, and the U.S. military. The game features this gritty neo-noir style, and in between a lot of the levels, it uses this like graphic novel panels with voiceovers as its primary means of storytelling. And they did this with drawing inspiration from hard-boiled detective novels by authors like Mickey Spillane. James McCaffrey, you may have known him, who sadly passed away 2 years ago, did the voiceover for Max Payne in such a gritty way that no one else really could capture. The graphic novel panels were displayed like comic book frames, and his voiceovers provided this like emotional, subdued, angry, depressed context. It contains many allusions to Norse mythology, particularly in the myth of Ragnarok and several other names. And Remedy Entertainment, I think they're a Finnish developer, so I guess it kind of makes sense. But the gameplay itself, heavily influenced by the Hong Kong action cinema genre, particularly the work of director John Woo. And it was one of the first games to feature the bullet time effect, popularized by The Matrix. John Woo during this time had actually quite a few very prolific action movies, and this will not be the last time I'll be talking about him. Hard Boiled, The Killer, Face Off, Hard Target, and even Mission Impossible 2 were in his credits. And most of these movies featured these crazy over-the-top action sequences, mostly involving these like akimbo-style dual handgun gunplay and acrobatic maneuvers. It almost looked video gamey, so developers got to work on trying to emulate the style. And most of Max Payne involved running down hallways and through buildings, killing criminals indiscriminately with handguns, shotguns, assault rifles. There were no cover mechanics here. The idea was just run and gun and shoot. The unique mechanic in this game, like I said, were the slow-mo effects called bullet time. And it's an ability when triggered, either when standing or diving to dodge gunfire, slows down time for a short, brief period. And in this period, you can target enemies and kill them. Although Max and enemies will move slowly whilst active, players will be able to react to enemy gunfire quickly, while being provided more precise firefighting controls in battles. So it's represented by an hourglass next to Max's health bar, and every time you use bullet time, it depletes, and you can only be replenished by, of course, killing enemies. Another cool mechanic in this game was this adaptive AI difficulty, which was the game's default difficulty called Fugitive. The AI is based on the player's performance in a level through each of its areas. If a player is doing well, the AI modifies the next area of the level to feature more enemies, fewer item pickups. If the player was doing poorly, more pickups were provided and enemies were made less threatening. It's kind of unique, and we don't see this that often anymore in modern games. Not that I know. The second game, largely the same, with Max Payne having been forgiven for all the crimes he was framed for and all those people that he killed indiscriminately. The only difference is the second playable character in this game, Mona Sachs. You can control. She was in the first game too, and I think in this game they had kind of like a romantic relationship, but they both play largely the same. Max Payne 3 jumped ship to the PS3 and 360 by Rockstar Games, not made by Remedy. These developers, you may have heard of a game series that they made, Grand Theft Auto. And this one features more of a mature storyline, more of a descent into madness for Max himself, while still making the action and the bullet time sequences at the forefront. To me, this was a strong game. When I'm talking this, Max Payne, the first game, was a strong game that, despite the personal trauma the character was going through, you felt his rage and anger as you mowed down countless enemies. I had so much fun with the mechanics of this game, and it was cool that there was nothing like this at the time. And despite this hourglass meter that needed to be filled constantly so you could use bullet time, I had so much fun using those abilities. If you're used to the modern day like cover-based shooters now, you might find this game difficult to play. This game doesn't reward you for hiding or getting into cover. The major mechanic is to be as aggressive as possible. However, that doesn't a bad game make, and is still a blast to play to this day. We're supposed to be getting remakes of this one and the second one by Remedy Entertainment. I don't know when, if it's going to be this year or next year, who knows. So, but they are working on it. I would say that the Max Payne game was the first, if not the most successful title to utilize this bullet time so well in a video game. And we saw a few copycats come out as well, the most notably the game Dead to Rights. This one's a third-person action video game developed and published by Namco Home Tech. It was released in 2002, and it was actually a timed exclusive for the Xbox and released for the PlayStation 2 and GameCube thereafter. So even back then, they were doing timed exclusives. Jack Slate, who's the main protagonist, a police officer, partnered with his K9 unit, Shadow. The two patrol Grant City metropolis, seemingly populated with more criminals than honest citizens. And that's a prime, setup for why you can kill so many criminals indiscriminately. Most of them are criminals, the people in the city at least. One night, while on routine patrol, Jack responds to a call, only to find his father, Frank Slate, murdered at this construction zone that he goes to. In pursuit of his father's killer, who he presumes is Augie Blatz, he's a racket boss with a grudge against Frank, and he has this voice poorly trying to emulate Christopher Walken. Actually, it's kind of hilarious. I did it poorly because that's how poorly they do it. The guy does it in the game, but thankfully he's only in the game for a short amount of time. But Jack is led through a labyrinth of crime and corruption. He's eventually framed, and he actually ends up going to jail for 7 months, which is kind of a wild story beat. He escapes from imprisonment. He was actually on death row in a fast-track justice system. Interestingly enough, Shadow, Jack's dog, is imprisoned here in the dog's kennels as well, though. Throughout the game, though, Shadow assists him during gameplay, which was probably the most unique aspect of the game besides its own version of bullet time, which they called Gun Fu. And Gun Fu was kind of like what Dead to Rights wore proudly. It was that title, which is largely the same as Max Payne. The bullet time was mostly, in this case, a dive mechanic. Had this slick targeting reticule that you could snap from enemy to enemy during your slow motion dive. And depending on how close you were or what weapon you were using, it gave you the ability to like, okay, is your shot going to be effective, or are you just going to be blasting bullets for fun, basically, and not doing anything? Shadow can attack enemies on command here as well, and will automatically kill whatever enemy he's aimed at, and then bring the player whatever weapon the enemy was carrying back to him. And to keep the dog from being too powerful, that there's a shadow meter in this case. In some puzzle sections, actually, the player you can take control of Shadow. Of course, there's only like twice or 3 times in the game or something like that. Too bad they didn't do it more. The second game, though, Dead to Rights 2, like Max Payne 2, is largely the same mechanics. However, it has a more grim storyline similar to the vein of the Max Payne series. The ending to it is actually massively depressing. Like, it's like, did I do anything? It's wild. We also did get a PSP title, as well as a PS3 and 360 title, and that's really all we've had so far. In the latter title, though, you could actually play and control Shadow more in many of the game's action sequences, which was kind of cool. You can actually go around and attack enemies. Dead to Rights focused on its gameplay loop, while most of these games do. And while the levels in these titles remain largely the same, just in different locations, I thought the gameplay was still fun. Rogue cops going on killing sprees, seeking revenge was all the rage at this time. And I don't know. I was here for it. I don't know if you guys were there for it, but I was. We also got Stranglehold. This came out in 2007 for the 360, PS3, and PC, and was brought to us by John Woo himself. This game served as a sequel to the movie Hardboiled that he did, and stars Chow Yun-fat reprising his role from the film. It was Midway's first game using Unreal Engine 3, and it was a trial and error kind of thing, but I would say it largely worked out for him. 3 triad groups in this game, the storyline. You got these 3 triad groups fighting for territory in Hong Kong: Dragonclaw, the Imperial Nines, and Golden Cane. After a police officer goes missing, the Hong Kong police force receives a ransom call, which is wild, just one random police officer. Disobeying orders from Police Chief Lee, which was his bread and butter, Inspector Tequila Yuen, played by Chow Yun-fat, heads to a Kowloon market alone to save the officer, but finds evidence that the officer is dead. What follows is a body count so massive and so destructive, and featuring locations all over the globe to unravel a gang conspiracy and millions of dollars at stake. Players can traverse each level by walking, diving, running, taking cover behind walls. Weapons, you had so many weapons: pistols, submachine guns, assault rifles, rocket launchers, grenades, heavy machine guns. You could really jump in any direction, interact with any object while aiming at an opponent, or you could press this certain action button, which also will slow down time, creating a short window during which Tequila can shoot at his targets with pinpoint accuracy. They don't call it bullet time in this game. They call it tequila time in the game. And it generates this cinematic effect that mimics John Woo's films, which is really cool to see. This one's also managed through a meter, which drains the more times you use it. Tequila can also make use of his environment. He can move up and down railings, swinging from chandeliers, sliding across tabletops, riding on carts, all while shooting at enemies. He can also take down environmental hazards to dispatch his enemies, like falling railings, signs, explosive barrels, of course, because every game needs an explosive barrel. John Woo called this type of combat gun ballet. So you got bullet time, you got gun fu, and then his was a little bit more of a form of artistic expression if you watch some of his movies. And it is kind of like gun ballet a little bit. It's almost like a dance. So this was unlike the previous games I talked about, in a way that the environments were actually so much more destructible. And this was largely due to the more powerful Unreal Engine 3 that was used. And it really captured the chaos of those frenetic and destructive John Woo movies, with all the environments that were just destroyed, papers, birds flying around, and all the gunplay, of course. Honestly, this game was a ton of fun. Blew me away with how lifelike the destruction was around me. And it really was. I watched a lot of John Woo movies at the time, and to have a game based on those movies, man, it's so cool. While the game still required you to play fast and loose, you had to spend time looking around your environment to see what you could use to get an edge on your enemies. Sometimes you can miss things. You're like, oh, I didn't think I could shoot that. Or I suppose I could have used that. I could have, shot. There's one scene where like all these enemies are standing up on these like railings, and you could shoot out the railings and just collapse it, killing all of them, which is the use of like 2 bullets. The more of your environment you used to kill, the more stars you got, which gave you really cool combat bonuses. So that was really cool. Another game similar in this vein is Wet, which came out on the PS3 and 360 in 2009 and starred Eliza Dushku as the main protagonist, Ruby with an I. This is an action game that combines shooting and swordplay with acrobatics and a lot of blood and gore. The main character, she carries twin pistols and a sword. She can also carry like dual shotguns, dual submachine guns. She can carry crossbows too as well, and can fire while jumping, sliding on her knees, running on walls. And you can do this without having to have a meter of anything. So this actually incentivizes you to do these acrobatic things as often as you can. And during these acrobatic actions, the game enters slow motion, which she will automatically aim at a second enemy. So you can actually shoot 2 enemies at once, which is something really cool that just made it easy. She can also combine her attacks. You can wall run off a person. You can perform a sword uppercut while sliding. You can rack up kills, collecting multiplayer icons. And then obviously it's keeping track of your score and how acrobatic your kills are. And then, of course, you need to heal up, so you find bottles of whiskey, and that's how you heal. Some sections of the game, actually, you will go into this like murderous berserker like rage, and these sections are presented in this like colorful, dark red, gray noir style, and basically her attacks become faster, stronger, and mostly this rage sequences like happens when you're going to be swarmed by a lot of enemies. And of course, the more kills you chain together, the more your psychotic fury stays intact. So there's also really cool motorway sections that features basically you jumping from car to vehicle to truck in all these like really cool quick time events. I don't know, some people aren't into quick time events, but it has a place in some cases. So and this was really a lot of these sequences are really cool. So basically, like the game starts with you doing this work for this guy, William Akers, who's like this mob boss. 1 year later, he rehires you for something, and you find out he's an imposter. And who leaves you for dead. But you get healed up, and of course, what's first on your mind? Revenge. The game was received with pretty mixed reviews, but honestly, I had a blast with it. Playing as a badass female protagonist was really refreshing, and Eliza's performance and quips during the gameplay was great. The mix of swordplay and gunplay varied the combat enough to make it not so boring. And of course, adding those acrobatic maneuvers was awesome. Like, it's a shame this one's locked onto other consoles like the previous titles I talked about, which kind of sucks. Devil May Cry was a smart-ass, trash-talking demon hunter who hit the PS2 console in 2001. And interestingly enough, the original idea for this game was supposed to be Resident Evil 4. But when the game pivoted to the Resident Evil 4 that we have now, the developers decided to actually keep this and make a new game franchise out of it. Devil May Cry consists of these, levels or missions, whatever, and the players have to fight numerous enemies, performing, platforming tasks with like this kind of like pseudo fixed, moving, third-person action camera. Sometimes you got to solve puzzles as well. But the bread and butter of this is you get graded based on how well you perform in the levels and how stylish your combat is. You can go, it's basically D, C, B, and A. With, of course, you can get a top grade of C if you're just, if you're awesome. Basically, like I said, they're based on time it takes, how well you dispatch the enemies, and how many objects or items that you pick up along the way. Stylish combat is defined as this game as performing an unbroken series of varied attacks while also avoiding damage, and it's basically tracked on screen live for you. So like, there's a point where like you'll be surrounded by zombies or, demons or enemies or whatever. And then you have to dispatch them while taking as little hits as possible, keeping your attack chains going, keeping your combos going. And of course it racks up the points. The more, you keep those going, the more hits the player makes, the higher that gauge rises. So it can rate you as dull, cool, bravo, absolute. And then of course the top is stylish. Repeatedly using the same move, though, causes the gauge to stop rising, so you can't just like spam the attack button. So you have to use every move in your arsenal, every weapon in your arsenal, and all these different combos. So the gauge terms are similar to the grades given at the end of the mission. So like I said, if you receive damage, all of a sudden your combo ends and you go back to dull. The game series continues to this day, with the original trilogy largely staying on the PS2. We got 4 on the 360 and the PS3, and of course 5 on the modern systems, with that same over-the-top stylish action and wild cast of characters. The combat wasn't really what we consider as Souls-like now. It was really easy to master once you got the hang of the combos you can use and all the different enemy types. The frenetic metal industrial soundtrack was awesome. It kept your blood pumping throughout the game. And then, of course, the cutscenes in between, which, some people like cutscenes, others don't. But these cutscenes, a lot of them were crazy over-the-top action cutscenes that were just fun as hell to watch. The game's story really is nothing much to brag home about. Just fighting demon spawns of hell, you being the son of Satan or something like that, whatever, as Dante. And of course, there's other characters that, you'll be playing as later on in the series. So, pro tip, though, you can skip the second title in this game. I don't know what the hell they did there, but they more than made up for it with 3. And I think from my personal perspective, Devil May Cry 2 lost a lot of the sarcastic and kind of aggro quips that made Dante such a popular character in the first one. He was largely kind of just like, he didn't talk much in the second game. So I don't know what they were thinking with this. I wonder if they just wanted to focus more on the action of the game. But I don't know. It's not universally praised, I would say. But Devil May Cry 3, like I said, more than made up for it. So, which Devil May Cry 3, I think, was like a prequel of sorts. The Grand Theft Auto series, I feel, needs its own episode. But the titles are largely based on, basically your criminal protagonist trying to make it big in a city filled with corruption and, of course, opportunity. The big mechanic of the game is its open world and the freedom to do whatever you want. You can pick up missions, or you can just run around causing city havoc with whatever you have at your disposal. Guns, melee weapons, fists, vehicles, so much more. The more wanton destruction you cause, though, the more police start to really show up and take you out, making your indiscriminate destruction have consequences. You can't just do whatever you want. So, you can, but like I said, there's consequences. These games defined the subgenre of open world games. We got so many other similar games during this time, like Saints Row, which was I love the series, with more humor and parody than anything. At least the first few titles. You got Sleeping Dogs, Infamous, Mafia, and so much more. You didn't need an excuse to be bad. You just could do it. So there's a rumor we're getting GTA 6 this year. So we'll see. So you can't talk about badass protagonists without mentioning Doom, which is a franchise still going strong to this day. We just got recently Doom: The Dark Ages last year in 2025. It's a first-person action game where you're trying to stop demon spawns from invading Mars and Earth. Why you? Because you're the Doom guy. Eventually, later on in the series, with more of the later games, you're called the Doom Slayer. But back then, you were just a nameless character, just called Doom Guy. The first titles, though, didn't have much of a story or lore behind, who you were. But the more recent titles flesh that out a little bit as why he's as powerful as he is. A little bit more mythological context to it. But in the older games, you were more of a human space marine, so to speak. Now he's almost like a demon-killing god. Duke Nukem came out during this time as well, who was a crass and badass protagonist. A little bit different than the Doom guy, who was, silent and didn't really say anything. Duke single-handedly saving the world from alien invasion while making jokes at the same time. He had a foray in his first-person action games. He also did some third-person action games as well on the PlayStation 1. The last title we got was Duke Nukem Forever, which came out on the 360 and the PS3, which did not go over so well with fans of the franchise. I think they just brought the game out and they just said, here you go. So Kratos, the main character from the God of War series, and we're talking the first original ones for the PlayStation 2. These games were similar in vein to the Devil May Cry series, but with more, Kratos has more of a personal axe to grind and not a care in the world about anyone who stood in his way. His whole personality, his whole aura was just rage, just angry all the time. So Legacy of Kain from the PlayStation 1 era was more of a He was more of an anti-hero than anything. Kane was more of a vampire who needed blood to survive, but also needed to stop evil even worse than him. Soul Reaver had a different character, who basically had the same kind of personality traits. He's a vampire, needs blood to survive, yada yada. So, but you can actually pick and choose if you want to kill or you want to just maim and take their blood. Soul Reaver was a little bit more action focused, and at this time we started getting more hack and slash games, almost becoming its own genre. So, and interestingly enough, I would say at this time, this was a random one that I thought of. Prince of Persia: Warrior Within tried to nail this dark aesthetic and brooding protagonist that's just angry all the time with, edgy emo hair and, dark eyes and stuff like that. Army of Two is a series that came out on the 360 and PS3. And basically the series was all about two mercenary bros shooting their way through waves and waves of enemies, smack talking each other at the same time as well. This had fun co-op gameplay. Big action sequences were plentiful in this series, and even had some laugh out loud moments. I had a lot of fun playing this game with a buddy of mine when it was out back in the day. And of course, you can't talk about the Army of Two series without just mentioning 50 Cent Blood in the Sand. He had a game called Bulletproof that came out on the PS2 and Xbox previously, but really it was Blood in the Sand that was the better title. With basically the deal was you're 50 Cent, 50 Cent or 50 Cent, depends how you call him. But 50 is trolling the streets and sands of a fictional Middle Eastern country, killing terrorists and ex-military and gangs along the way, trying to get paid, alongside with his friends in G Unit. It's literally the story, but it's fun. Actually, it's a lot of fun. You also got to mention, the Gears of War franchise, a little bit more deeper, a little bit more personal stories, but really, honestly, the fact that your assault rifle comes with a chainsaw on it, I think made it feel like a bro game. That it's just like, hey, you know what? I just want to run up and just like chainsaw this guy, this monster in half. So, but I would say as the series went on, it kind of delved more into like a more mature storyline. So not very much like a aggressive bro game like these other titles I talked about. But at this time too, we had some really good melee beat 'em ups, like Urban Reign. This came out on the PS2 in 2005. And basically in this game, especially in a lot of other games, basically you're going from city street to city street, just beating up anybody in your way. You had similar games like The Bouncer, Beatdown, Fists of Vengeance, Final Fight, Fighting Force, God Hand. So many others made hand-to-hand combat fun, rewarding, and feeling all-powerful. Before it was like on a 2D plane, like Streets of Rage and Double Dragon and stuff, and now it's in the 3D era where like let's do this in 3D. Same concept, just obviously in a more open, wide 360-degree space that you can play. You're just cool, badass looking guys and girls ready to issue the beatdowns on anyone that stood in their way. You don't really need an over-the-top story. Just send enemies my way. I want to take them out. And these were the games where the action was first. You couldn't play these games cautiously or carefully. They really prioritized combat above all else. There was no stealth. I mean, there were games at this time that had stealth. You had Splinter Cell series. You had the Metal Gear Solid series where they kind of prioritized stealth over action. You had those moments where like you could maybe get into some action sequences, but you were kind of underpowered. These were the games where you were overpowered. And I would say as a video game protagonist, you're dispatching hundreds of enemies. You should be all powerful. So that's what these games brought to you. They brought you the mechanics. They brought you the abilities to be the baddest MRFer out there. And it didn't apologize for it. These protagonists were over the top, strong dudes, acrobatic, strong females, traumatized anti-heroes that just wanted revenge or to just hurt people, just wanted to hurt everybody in their way. And in those stories, Max Payne was probably the more complex protagonist that I talked about in this episode, where it was, he had this trauma and he had nothing to live for. So he was almost suicidal in a way to think, I'm going to just kill everybody in my way. And if I die along the way, I guess I die along the way, getting my vengeance. But of course, he doesn't die along the way. He, makes his way all the way through. like I said, this was the time when just these game mechanics ruled our consoles. They built games around a gameplay mechanic, and that was what we needed. No other complex mechanics, no other RPG-like elements where, you needed to level up, or you needed to level up your armor or your equipment or your weapons, or add skins or add scopes or other things to your weapons. Like, at least for the most part with most of these games, they were just fun sandboxes that had one objective in mind: kill everyone standing in your way. I mean, in this sea of modern games with complex stories and curated narratives, and there's a place for those. There's a place for those. Like, you could look to the Uncharted series, which is kind of like an indiscriminate, murder simulator where, yeah, you're just a guy trying to find artifacts and trying to solve the mysteries of the ancient world, but also killing a bunch of people along the way. Had a little bit more complex storylines and had a little bit more complex character arcs and character development, but we didn't have these big focused narratives at the time. Late 90s, early 2000s, when video games started to get bigger and bigger, and the ability to tell complex stories was getting more realized. I think developers at the time were kind of throwing things at the wall to see what sticks, to see what works. How can we make this into a big story? And also at the time, make this a fun game to play, and a quick game to play, something that you could just drop in and drop out of, instead of like, oh God, this is an 80-hour narrative that I have to slog through. This was, these were different times. I talked about playing Rise to Honor earlier. That was another game that I thought was a lot of fun, where it was just like you're just one martial arts dude running around just dispatching enemies wave after wave after wave after wave. And honestly, even though we have a place for these like complex narrative games nowadays, it's just fun every once in a while to go back to games like these to remind you how fun they can be. Like even going further back to a lot of the beat 'em up genres, where it was just, move right, beat up everybody along the way. That's it. Go to the final objective. Those final objectives were just to get to that boss level, get to that boss stage. This is the main antagonist of this game. I think those games are fun, and they'll definitely have a place in my heart for sure. So I hope they have a place in your heart too. Maybe reminds you every now and then to just go back and play some of these titles. So, well, that about wraps it up in this episode. A nice short one. So be sure to follow me on my socials on X, Threads, and Instagram at RetroXPodcast. Whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, please follow and enable notifications so you can find out when I drop a new episode, hopefully every week. Episodes are also live on YouTube, so you can follow me there as well at RetroXPodcast. And I do want to thank the Hair of the Dogcast Network for allowing me into their group of shows, and consider contributing to us at Patreon at patreon.com/Hair of the Dogcast to join the Discord community as well, where you can get access and exclusive episodes every week. Thanks for listening, guys.